Most of the plants don't die because of watering mistakes. They die because of their roots cannot breathe. And today I'm going to show you the chunky soil mix that I use for my most of plants while repotting a few plants that are long overdue for a fresh start. Let's get into it. These are the plants that I'll be working on today, and honestly, most of them are overdue for a repot. My Philodendron Ring of Fire and Philodendron Gloriosum haven't been doing very well lately. They're not growing the way I expected, and they have actually been sitting in the same nursery soil since last year. And if you have ever bought plants from a nursery, you probably know that nursery soil isn't always meant to be a long-term potting mix. Over time, it can become compact, hold too much moisture, or simply stop providing the kind of environment healthy roots need. I also have a Philodendron Giganteum that's currently growing in a pretty poor soil mix. It's surviving, but I know it can do much better. Then I have my Anthurium Crystallinum. Recently, I have noticed that the soil has become quite hydrophobic. Whenever I water it, the water just sits on the top for a while and takes a long time to properly soak into the soil. The plant has also been looking a little droopy, and the new leaf that's coming in has been stuck at the same stage for weeks without much progress. So I think it's definitely time to check what's happening below the soil surface. And then I have my rosemary plant and my butterfly plant. These two are still sitting in their nursery grow bags, and I think it's finally time to give them. So today's goal is simple. I'm going to make one chunky airy soil mix that works as a base for most of these plants, and then make small adjustments wherever needed. Because healthy plants start with healthy roots. So let's make the mix. Before I start, here's the rough ratio I use, and I don't stress about being exact. Soil mixing is actually pretty forgiving. I work in parts, so a part can be any scoop or container you like, as long as you keep it consistent. For the base, I'm using 2 parts garden soil and 1 part coco peat. The soil gives structure while the coco peat helps hold moisture so the roots don't dry out too quickly. If you don't have coco peat, you can use peat moss instead. It works in the same way. Next, 1 part compost. Compost adds organic matter and provides nutrients that plants can use as they grow. If you don't have compost, worm castings or well rotted manure can do a similar job. After that, 2 parts orchid bark. This is the ingredient that really makes the mix chunky. It creates air pockets throughout the soil, improves airflow around the roots, and stops everything from becoming compact over time. If orchid bark isn't available, pine bark is a good alternative. Then 1 part cocoa chips. They help keep the mix loose while also holding a little moisture, creating a nice balance between drainage and moisture retention. Now, 1 part perlite and 1 part pumice. These are your drainage boosters. They stop the soil from staying wet for too long and keeps everything light and airy. If you only have one of them, that's completely fine. Just use a little more of whichever one you have available. And finally, a small handful of charcoal. I don't use it much, but I like adding some whenever I have it available. This one is completely optional, so don't worry if you don't have it. Now let's mix everything together. Honestly, this is one of the most satisfying parts. Just look at the texture. Light, airy, chunky, exactly what I want. A healthy root system needs both moisture and oxygen, and this mix provides both. Now that the mix is ready, let's start repotting. First up, my Philodendron Ring of Fire. Whenever I repot a plant, I always check the roots first because the roots usually tells you what's happening long before the leaves do. This one could definitely use some fresh airy soil around the roots. Next is the Gloriosum. Since this is a crawler, I am making sure the rhizome stays near the surface instead of burying it too deeply. And then the Giganteum. This one was growing in the poorest soil of the bunch. The old mix had become heavy and compact. So I'm really looking forward to seeing how it responds to a fresher, chunkier growing medium. For all of my philodendrons, I'm using the base mix exactly as it is. They like moisture, but they also need plenty of oxygen around their roots, which is why this type of mix works so well for them. Now let's talk about the Anthurium Crystallinum. When I took it out of the pot, I found something interesting. The roots weren't mushy and they weren't rotting, but many of them were dry and dead from the tips. That explains why the plant had been looking droopy and why the new leaf wasn't really progressing. The old soil had become so compact and hydrophobic that it simply wasn't creating a healthy environment for the roots anymore. For anthuriums, I like a mix that stays chunky but holds a little more moisture around the roots. So to the base mix, I'm adding some sphagnum moss, a little extra perlite and pumice, and some additional cocoa chips. Normally, I would also add more orchid bark, but I'm a little short on bark today, so I'm making up for it with the other chunky ingredients. The goal is to keep plenty of airflow around the roots while still maintaining consistent moisture, which anthuriums really appreciate. Now for the rosemary, this is one of those plants that needs a small tweak. I'm adding extra pumice and perlite because rosemary likes very fast drainage and doesn't enjoy sitting in wet soil. So it's the same base mix but with a little extra drainage added in. Honestly, when in doubt with rosemary, I prefer going chunkier rather than heavier. And for the butterfly plant, I'm using the mix mostly as it is. It still benefits from a loose, well draining medium that can hold enough moisture for healthy growth. This is what I love about having one base mix. I don't need a different recipe for every single plant. I start with one good mix and then make small adjustments depending on the plant's needs. It makes gardening so much simpler. One quick but important thing before we finish, that is watering. A chunky mix like this drains faster and dries out more quickly than dense, compact soil. So, there are two things I keep in mind. First, water thoroughly. Don't be afraid to really soak the soil until water runs out through the drainage holes because the excess water drains away instead of sitting around the roots. And second, you may find yourself watering a little more often compared to heavier soil mixes, but that's the trade off. It's much harder to accidentally overwater roots growing in a chunky, airy mix like this. So, to quickly recap the mix, 2 parts garden soil, 1 part coco peat, 1 part compost, 2 parts orchid bark, 1 part cocoa chips, 1 part perlite, 1 part pumice, and a small handful of charcoal. Chunky, airy, and well draining. Then for plants that needs even more drainage like rosemary, simply add extra perlite and pumice. And for moisture loving plants like anthuriums, add a little sphagnum moss and some extra chunky materials to help balance moisture and airflow. That's the whole system. Now, after reporting, I am really happy with how everything looks. Fresh soil not seem exciting, but it makes a huge difference over time. Sometimes a plant doesn't need more fertilizer. Sometimes it doesn't need more water. Sometimes it needs a better home for its roots. So that's the chunky mix I use for most of my plants, airy, well draining and easy to adjust for whatever you are growing. Now let's see how they respond over the next few weeks. And if you have got a favorite ingredient you always add to your mix, tell me in the comments. I would love to know about what works for you.